Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I know, it's noon time, but we thank you very much for being here. And so I want to welcome you here today. We're glad to have our students, of course, our faculty and staff, and members of the community to join us for this public policy event, Forum on Digital Accessibility. We are at an important moment. Believe it or not, in April 2024, the U.S. Department of Justice updated part of the Americans with Disabilities Act, often called the ADA Act. This update focuses on digital accessibility specifically. And so what they wanted to make sure was that the updates for websites and mobile devices, mobile apps, can be used by individuals with accessibility needs. And for public institutions like UCF, this rule means our websites, our apps must meet clear accessibility requirements by April 24th, 2026. And so that is in less than a month. And so today we're going to break down what that actually means for us. The rule says that online content must follow a set of guidelines called WCAG 2.1, level AA. What does that mean? We're going to discuss that today. These guidelines are about making digital content usable for everyone. That includes things like screen readers that are compatible for people who are blind, captions for videos, clear navigation for keyboard users, readable text for individuals with cognitive and or learning disabilities. You don't need to know technical details to get that this is a big idea and it's a big responsibility that we have. And this requirement applies very broadly. It's not just about the apps. It's not just about the websites. It's not about anything that we're building in-house. It applies way beyond that. It also includes tools and platforms provided by outside vendors, things like learning management systems that we use, registration portals that's currently in process, departmental websites we all have, online forms, we use those daily, and communication tools, emails. In short, almost every digital space students, faculty, employees, or visitors interact with is affected by this new legislation, this new policy. So today's forum is built around a question that has come up again and again and again and over and over. If everyone is responsible for accessibility, who actually makes sure that it happens? So I'm going to repeat that again. If everyone is responsible for accessibility, who actually makes sure it happens? We know we'll get the email, we'll get the knock on the door saying, hey, you didn't do this, but who's responsible for making sure it gets done? And so the short answer is, it's a shared responsibility. It's how universities work, but it can also mean that responsibility gets blurred or passed along. And so our goal today is to bring this challenge of responsibility to center stage with our amazing panelists. And you will hear from them who deal with the responsibility of digital accessibility compliance in their daily work. This forum is not a lecture. Our panelists come from different roles, different backgrounds, and you may find that they don't always see this responsibility the same because they're looking at it from very different angles. And so we have some canned questions for our panelists, but we're also going to open it up to the audience to ask questions. And so we, panelists, I encourage you to be honest and to be specific and to maybe use language that you know, but the office is like, because like the WCAG 2.1 level level double A? Can you break that down? So let's use, language for our everyday individuals. So I'm gonna briefly introduce our panelists and then we're gonna get right into our questions. And so we have here to my immediate left, Ms. Christina LaRue. She is the ADA coordinator in the Office of Non-Discrimination and Accommodations Compliance here at UCF. She oversees the institution-wide disability and accessibility policy implementation. And so digital accessibility is something that she has been at the forefront at UCF since its inception. Her work focuses on translating federal disability and accessibility requirements into practical governance, training, and compliance strategies across academic and administrative units. Next to her is Dr. David Kevin Moran. He is an assistant professor of computer science here at UCF and also is director of the SAGE Research Lab. His research examines software engineering, security, and the use of automated and AI-driven tools, including their potential and limitations in addressing digital accessibility challenges. And as we know, AI is moving at the speed, faster than the speed of light. And so, Dr. Moran, I can't imagine your work right now. Next to him, we have Roger Wolf. He is the Director of Web Communications and Digital Strategies here at UCF. He has more than 2 decades of experience in higher education, web governance, and digital publishing. He oversees UCF's decentralized web ecosystem, focusing on usability, accessibility, and scalable content governance. And so a lot of times we just think, oh, website. Well, there's a little bit more than just the website, as Mr. Wolf will share with us. Next, we have Mr. Nick Polito. Yes? Okay. He is a PhD student in literature at the University of South Florida, and he works as a composition instructor also at USF, too. He works at USF and Valencia. His teaching, scholarship, and student experience explores the intersections of accessibility, disability studies, faculty labor, and inclusive course design in public higher education. And our last panelist, but certainly not our least panelist, is Dr. Monica Rodriguez. She is a lecturer in the Department of Anthropology here at UCF. Her current research focuses on Latin American deaf and hard of hearing self and personhood in educational settings, the medical encounter and assistive technology use. Dr. Rodriguez has conducted ethnographic fieldwork in the US and internationally. She currently teaches this course focused on cultural anthropology, medical anthropology, and disability. Dr. Rodriguez received her degree, her bachelor's degree from California State University, also her master's degree at CSU, Los Angeles, and her PhD from Wayne State University in Detroit, all in anthropology. So now that I've introduced our panelists, I'm going to ask an opening question that I would like all of our panelists to answer if possible. Digital accessibility is described as everyone's responsibility. Yet, accountability can become unclear in practice. From your perspective, who should be held ultimately responsible for digital accessibility? And what are the risks of distributing or centralizing that responsibility? So if it's everybody's responsibility, who's holding us accountable? Who wants to take that question first? Who wants to answer first? Whoever wants to answer the question first. If you need me to repeat it, I can.
Do I have this? Am I speaking to the mic?
Yeah.
All right, good. I'm going to play devil's advocate and ask you guys to explore this idea with me. The end user is ultimately responsible for accessibility. And as we explore that idea and we explore our responsibility to them, things like the iPhone were a game changer and they were quick to adopt it for their accessibility needs. We then could go and build apps that work for what they need, but everyone is an individual. There's a wide spectrum of accessibility needs. It's not a homogenous group that just has one set of needs. The more we can explore that together with them and be good stewards of their experience, the more we can actually make this a dialogue and get ahead of the curve, because I think that's one of the later questions is how do we work proactively to make sure that we're not just meeting the needs of today, but addressing the needs of tomorrow. So at the end of the day, the end user is going to be a lot faster to figure out what they need, and we just need to open up the lines of communication so that we can understand that as well as possible.
Who wants to answer next?
I'll jump in. Hopefully this is working for y'all. So my role at UCF is to really kind of look at this holistically from the entire institution. And so my answer is always going to be kind of what Roger said. The end user, of course, is the one kind of making, well, not the end user, but the person who's making the content is responsible for making sure that's accessible. But I think as an institution, there's also responsibility. And I'll jump on a soapbox for 1 second, but we were talking about this right before we started. We've seen this with lots of different identities throughout time, right? Like, we don't know what we don't know for a while until we learn that. And so, exactly what Roger was saying, like, we need to understand what the end user needs, so the person with a disability, but also acknowledge all of you in your jobs, all of you in your education were probably not taught how to do this stuff at all. You weren't taught how to add captions to videos or how to add alt text or whatever that looks like. And so as an institution, we also have a responsibility to help you understand that and give you that knowledge and some resources. And so I think ultimately, whoever's creating that content needs to be held accountable and make it accessible, but the institution also has to be held accountable to make sure we have you set up with what you need to learn and to do this work. And so that's why I think absolutely a shared responsibility. There's no one person or thing to put blame on when something's not accessible. There's all kinds of pieces to this to make sure everybody knows what we're talking about. And part of that is the education and the resources needed to do this work.
Yeah, I will second the shared responsibility and the part about not being taught how to do these things. When you're in like grad school, you're not taught how to teach. You're taught how to be in your discipline. And so often, unless you take maybe one pedagogy course throughout your graduate schooling, you're learning how to teach on the fly. You're not taught how to make a Canvas course at all. You're not taught how to make a course. So if you go to school for maybe early childhood education or secondary education, you are actually taking courses teaching you how to teach. We don't get that. Maybe if we're lucky, we get a couple. And so then we certainly do not get how to input these accessibility features into our courses. There are always resources on the campus, but we're rarely guided towards those resources. So I do think it's a shared responsibility. The educators need to be willing to make the changes in their courses and need to be willing to learn about the changes that are necessary, but I don't think it would be fair to cast all the blame on them. We need to be directed to those resources because we are, like everyone else, pulled in a million different directions.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining us here. So I agree that it is a shared responsibility, but at the top level, we can only do, I'm a lecturer, right? We can only do with what we have access to. So there's an institutional responsibility to give instructors access, including training, right? Whether we're lecturers or tenure track or instructors, whatever the case may be, to give us the resources we need, whether it's strictly in the classroom, in the online classroom, or the training that we need for making our classes accessible. On the other hand, I also think that the institution can only provide so much. There is a baseline, right, to give us access to, making the classroom accessible. But we also need to hear from the students about what they need. Just to give you guys an example, I'm hard of hearing, and usually I get asked if I want captioning, right, live captioning, or if I want American Sign Language. Well, I don't sign American Sign Language fluently, so that would, it would be nice to have if people had to go log in and they were sign language users, but that would not help me. And because I can hear, a live captioning doesn't help me either. Because there's a lag of time between what the really good captioning is and what I'm hearing people say. So for me, it's very difficult to have live captioning. I actually prefer AI captioning, because even though it's very wrong sometimes, it goes with what people are saying. So our students, whether they're online or in person, have very individual needs. And we don't know what they are until they communicate that with us. So it's very much a team effort. But it starts at the institutional level with them giving us access and training with everything that we need, and making sure that students are also aware of what resources are available to them.
I'm going to offer a slightly different perspective, only in the, if it is a skill that you're learning afterwards, it's still an add-on, as opposed to it being foundational in the hiring process and an understanding of a skill that is foundationally part of the job, or again, foundationally part of a responsibility that, when we talk about the true shared responsibility, additional professional development would be good encouragement from chairs, but the sense that you would come into the position and then be expected to start learning then, it's difficult because you're already in motion. So probably during an orientation or something that is, this is the, as everyone says, once you're in the mix, it's a whole lot harder to try to figure out what to do on the fly than it is to come in with that experience, or to have someone say during the job interview, this is a very important part of what we do here. How ready are you to work on this? And then to direct to resources to be prepared for the job coming into it. And that's a clarity of what the job is, and making sure that it's part of everyone's job here from the get-go.
Yeah, so I'll offer, again, maybe a slightly different perspective here. So I echo a lot of what the other panelists have said. But I'm going to push back on a few points and talk a little bit further in one direction. So meeting people with accessibility needs where they're at, and understanding what's required from them in order to make things accessible is really, really important. Yep.
She said that was better.
Okay, cool. And much better. Okay, cool. Now you can actually hear me. And once we get to that point where we understand the needs, we need to give people the tools where they can implement those needs in whatever part of the university they may be working in. And from this perspective, I think there's actually a responsibility for researchers to be building the types of tools that can make that job much easier for faculty, for administrators, for IT professionals, for whoever it might be. And we have a pretty amazing opportunity right now that, you know, a lot of this renewed focus on accessibility is coinciding with this rise in artificial intelligence. A lot of the accessibility issues that we face ultimately boil down to different types of perception problems. And we now have computers that are extremely good at perception. The danger in this is thinking that this is a silver bullet and we can just ask ChatGPT to make everything accessible and it will be great. That would be fantastic. Unfortunately, we're not there yet. And it really does require principled research where you're combining the capabilities that we have from some of these AI tools with other areas of discipline and engineering and humanities and social science to really get a lot of this right. And I think we're starting to see more research in this direction, but it's going to be even more important moving forward, you know, as we, you know, kind of face this reckoning with this, you know, new set of regulations in place.
And I wanted to add just one thing. I love the idea of making sure we're building technology to make this easier, and we're starting to see it, right? For sure, we need more. The other thing I want to say is, I want to make sure we realize the focus is bigger than just students too. The institution communicates to a lot of different types of people, including our own employees. And as somebody who does the employee accommodation process, I can tell you we're also lacking a little bit in internal accessibility. So our folks who are employed with us or who are faculty who also need that level of accessibility. And so it's much bigger than I think we think about it, let alone the public communications that we're having with folks or those that are coming onto our campus for events and things like that. But what I really like about what Roger said is we have to find a way to integrate accessibility into the baseline of everything, right? It can't just be an add-on, an afterthought, things like that. And so, yes, maybe it's hiring processes and things like that, but it's also when you're developing a new tool, how do we make sure that that's in your development process, right? Like we've thought about accessibility and intentionally built it into that. Or when we're creating an Instagram post, have we already thought about our alt text for our image, right? So getting it into just the everyday things that we do will help make this easier. Now, it's not gonna happen tomorrow, or even probably in 2026 at all. But that's where you start to really get accessibility to just be not even an afterthought, but it's just part of our process. And I think we've done that with a lot of things over the years, and this is the next one that we're gonna have to start doing that with. And of course, that's training and getting everybody on the same page, but that's the underlying piece of all of this, is getting it into everything that you built from the ground up without adding it afterwards and having to modify.
One challenge that we face, and it's kind of interesting because you brought up WCAG 2.1 AA compliance. We have a tendency towards acronyms and impenetrable shortenings, and so even the term or phrase accessibility has become this lump group, and if we don't have a semantic definition for what we're really talking about, we're not going to get to the actual heart of accessibility. We're only going to meet some set of requirements. People will be able to say, I'm shooting for WCAG 2.1 AA compliance, and not really think about what that means to a real person. It's just a set of checklists or bullet points. And so I think having a conversation in a human way is going to be important. It's going to be important for prompts. It's going to be important for the end user. It's going to be important for us to adopt it as an emotional and or philosophical base for what we do here. So breaking some of those things down is going to be really important so that they don't just become checklists on your performance appraisal or something that somebody goes to an office and says, did I meet these requirements? It's like, are you helping people? That's a more nebulous thing than I've checked a federal compliance requirement.
Roger, your comments just really segue us into our next question. And so someone said, how ready are we to work on this? Thinking about these new digital accessibility requirements that carry a compliance deadline of April 24th. And there are some strong mandates. And with these mandates, a lot of people are saying, well, these are overdue. This should have been happening. Some are saying, whoa, now I need to put this together. And the scope and the technical standards, some just don't have access. Our Nick talked about the fact that we have stuff, but we need the guided resources to be able to use it. And so my question is, who has the stronger case of where do the most significant policy agreements still remain? Who has the stronger case? Or is there a case? Or should it just be, hey, this is what it is, we need to make it happen, and we need to figure it out?
I don't know how well I can speak to like actual pieces of policy, but I know I can speak to the rollout and implementation of it because I also have to update my courses because they're not perfectly compliant. So since I work at two different universities, I work at Valencia at the downtown campus that shares it with UCF, and I work at USF in Tampa. Valencia has been super forward with providing resources in my campus courses. They have Ally built into all of the courses, which is a tool that tests accessibility of each object on every page or each page overall. USF has said nothing about the Title II requirements at all. We don't have Ally. I have not heard a single thing from any leadership at the university at all about it, and we kind of need it next month. So I don't know, I wouldn't know about it if it were not for me working at Valencia as well. So I don't know whose failure that is. I'm just a grad student USF, so I don't exactly have much sway anywhere in the university. So it's a very last minute haphazard rollout at different places. I can't speak to the policy level of that, but the reality of it is that I know some instructors who don't have outside knowledge of accessibility, features will be scrambling, and it could end up worse in some courses because of it. Trying to integrate new things could break things. So I'm worried is where I went, concerned.
So I'll jump in with a little bit of history too. This has been a requirement since the 90s, right? Like the Department of Justice in the 90s came out and said, hey, accessibility is a part of websites. Now, it wasn't written how it is now. This is the first time we've seen a federal, not mandate, a federal regulation updated to this level. We have other things that have told us for 30 plus years that we should be doing this. And I'll go back to what I said earlier, sometimes you don't know what you don't know. If you were not keyed into the disability community, you may not even know some of this stuff existed. I've met people on campus, and I'm like, hey, you gotta do this, and they're like, Christina, what are you saying to me? Like, I don't even know what that means. And when we talk through it, and they realize, oh, we're just making sure folks have access to content, they're like, okay, how do I do this then, right? And so, I think it's not necessarily who has the stronger case, because the law has said for 30 plus years, we have to do this, right? But you may not have known that. And so I think we have to kind of start working from there and give the education and the communication and things like that. I'm sorry to hear other institutions haven't been talking about it. That is not great in any way. I will say UCF has been talking about this for a long time in pockets. Well before I got here. I've been here 6 years. I know folks in this audience actually who are big proponents of accessibility who've been talking about this for decades on this campus. The centralized communication started in 2022, where we started talking to the campus at large about what this means. We all know at UCF that's tough. We're very decentralized. It's hard to get everybody's attention. It's hard to make sure everybody knows what we're talking about. And so that's where we're at now, right, is making sure everybody has heard this message. If you haven't before, we've been saying it, so please get involved in the conversation and start moving forward. Now, are there gonna be disagreements on how to do this? Absolutely. I've been in a lot of those, right? And there's certain pieces of the WCAG that I won't bore you with that are harder than other pieces, right? So audio description for your videos is so much more difficult than putting alt text on your images. And I might be speaking a foreign language to some of y'all, but that's accessibility talk, right? And so that's the kind of stuff you want folks to at least know about, because once you know about it, then you are like, okay, how do I do this?
Well, Christina, you just rolled us into another question that's specifically for you.
Oh, good.
Thank you, first of all, for letting us know that this language has been on the books since the 90s. It's just been tightened up a little bit more, and a little bit more like mandated, put some teeth behind it. And you've helped UCF really develop this digital accessibility policy. I mean, you've led the initiative. What has been the most difficult trade-offs institutions face when turning accessibility principles into enforceable policies? And do you want to share maybe where there's been some resistance?
Yeah, so I think I would say, you've heard us say this whole time, communication has been one of the hardest pieces of all of this because folks didn't know about it. And so getting in front of everybody and helping them understand what this means has been some of the hardest pieces of all of this for sure. And I think because we haven't integrated accessibility into some of those baselines, like Roger spoke a little bit about hiring or about, we talked about software development, because those aren't integrated yet, it's hard to hold folks accountable and make sure they're doing what they need to do. Or maybe not even holding them accountable, but making sure they know what they need to do and how to do it, right? And so I think that has been one of the hardest parts. I think when it comes to resistance, what I hear from folks at this institution is we don't have the staffing that we would like to have, right? And so everybody feels overworked, underpaid, like this is another unfunded mandate that folks have to be doing, right? And so this realistically is something we should have been doing all along. I know it doesn't feel that way right now because a lot of us are learning about it now, but this is something as a society we should have been doing for years and decades. And so it's hard to come in in 2026 and tell you, hey, you've actually been making your Word docs wrong, can I help, can you please fix this? And you're like, one, nobody taught me how to make a Word doc, but two, now you're telling me I have to go fix all these things. And so part of it is giving the human perspective, which I've heard from panelists so far too, right? Helping folks understand who this is impacting and how it's impacting them. 1 in every 4 people in the US has a disability. That's just the statistic. In higher ed, for our students in undergrad, it's 20% of our student population, right? And so it's a massive amount of folks. They don't always all need the same thing, right? Accessibility looks different for everybody, but it's impacting a large population, not just the blind student that you're thinking of, because that's our first thing we think about with accessibility is somebody's using a screen reader, and that's what we're doing this for. It's much bigger than that. In terms of resistance, it's often folks who feel overworked and underpaid, or who feel like they don't have resources. Or I'll call out STEM specifically. That's just really hard to make accessible. Anything science, math, engineering, number-based is so hard to make accessible. And so we still have a lot of things we need to be doing as a society to fix that. Building some technologies to help would be amazing. And there's always going to be those pieces that they're just going to take us longer. But honestly, underneath all of this is the human perspective of it. Letting folks know how this is impacting people, what does that look like. And I've yet to meet somebody on this campus who will look at me and say, we're helping disabled people, I don't want to do that. They're usually like, oh my gosh, I had no idea, how do I do this? Give me the resources, I want to learn. I've yet to hear somebody look at me and be like, Christina, I'm not doing that. So, yeah.
Thank you. Well, since you called out STEM, we're going to go to Dr. Moran for the next question. And so automated testing and AI-based tools are increasingly promoted as accessible solutions. I mean, Dr. Rodriguez even indicated it's easier for her to use an AI tool for transcription in real time versus using captioning. So from a research and your engineering perspective, where do these tools meaningfully help, and do they risk creating a false sense of compliance?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and this is something, as these AI tools become popular across different industries, people are turning to them as this golden solution for all of these problems, when it's not always as easy a story as that. So a lot of the work that I've been involved in has been looking at how we build software systems and how we can equip software engineers with the tools that they need to make those software systems accessible as they're building them. Unfortunately, I mean, for the better part of decades now, accessibility is usually an afterthought in the software engineering process. There's deadlines, you have to deliver features, and the performance of most engineers is not necessarily measured in terms of how accessible the software is, but in terms of how feature-rich and how quickly they can get things done. And with the advent of AI becoming so much more capable over the last few years, we're now starting to get to a point where we can equip engineers with tools that can actually help them make a meaningful difference in accessibility of software. So some of the areas where we've seen pretty big advancement is in things like generating alt text for images, which are descriptions of images that help blind and low vision users try to understand what's going on a piece of digital media. Captioning video descriptions in real time. The perception models in AI that we have gotten really, really good at these sorts of things. Areas where there's still room for improvement are things related to like navigation around a web page, for motor impaired users, how they can navigate through different content using some sort of external switch or device or things like this. Some of that is so fundamentally baked into the software that it's not something that's easy to add like after the fact. It kind of has to be designed from the beginning as you're building it with some of these things in mind. And that is something that's really, really challenging for these current AI tools to do in practice. So luckily, we're seeing a lot of research starting to emerge that's combining, people who are doing engineering, people who are working in AI, and trying to build more principled approaches for combining AI with other fields, with computer science, with social sciences, to try to get some of these solutions right. And another thing that we tend to see, at least in like highly technical research fields, is people will develop solutions, sometimes without even going to talk to the target audience that those solutions are actually, they're saying, oh, blind and low vision users need this thing, so we developed something that needs this thing. And then you actually put that solution in front of users, and it's not always as good as it might have technically been made out to be. So there has to be this communication with the different demographics of interest in order to get some of these things right from the beginning. So, yeah, but we're making progress, which is good. But there needs to be a lot more focus and a lot more.
Thank you, Dr. Moran. So you inadvertently called out Mr. Roger Wolf over there. When you talked about software developers, you really don't consider accessibility when they're in the process of developing software. It's kind of an afterthought, as you said. And then you also said how there is no golden solution. So, Roger, the university manages highly decentralized digital ecosystems. And the Title II rule applies to vendors and contractors, the content as well as the content produced in-house. In your experience, what governance or procurement decisions most determine whether accessibility is addressed proactively rather than a retroactive fix? Or we address it when we get a complaint?
I'm actually going to give you a third.
Okay.
But I'm also going to tell you that I'm dodging a particular part of this question, which Christina brought up, which is the administrative tools on the back end that are being developed. I'm going to specifically talk about what is at the presentation layer for the end users, because those two things are very different and not usually part of the procurement or assessment process, is how good the administrative console is from an accessibility standpoint. Most people focus on their product and proving that they can produce content for the end user that is accessible, not whether or not the actual tool itself is accessible. So I'm purposefully dodging that one on the procurement side. And I wish I had a better answer for that. Although I will say that Kevin's answer helps to understand how that can be part of the process, is we need to make people more aware of what the responsibility and power they have when they're designing tools in the first place. On the second piece, this is kind of an interesting thing about the history of the web. The web started accessible. It was hypertext markup. It started accessible. We broke it. So the good news is that at its foundational level, this is content that already is marked up with the clarity of what it means, what it tells the user, and how it can be broken down by a machine for distribution. So how do we fix some of this? We don't let the vendors control the presentation layer. What we can do is say we want an API and we want the data produced in a format that is semantic to start with, and that it's got good data hygiene and portability. And then we decide what the presentation layer looks like by developing the tools on the front end to make sure that it reaches the users where they are. And that means both having it be responsive and having it be entirely distributable, and being performant, because that's one of the other things is when you're using a vendor product and it's cloud-based and you're dependent on how much traffic is going to their servers versus being able to control the flow of that to our. So again, caching layers also help with that. So all of these things get factored into what we try and do, which is, amongst other things, make it easy for people to do the right thing. If the base tools don't make you think at all, and what you do is you just go ahead and log in, put the content in, and the content is then formatted for you in the accessible markup, then you can be aware that what you're doing is good, but you don't need to know how it's like driving your car. You might not be able to fix your car. You're not responsible for that. You're bringing somebody else to do that. But like you and somebody brings up the issue. But otherwise, we produce the presentation layer and make that something that we can feed the information into. And I agree with you too. If we start with things like Word and Adobe PDFs, and we say, when you make these things, go ahead and make your tables accessible from the get-go. Everybody jokes about Clippy, but like if something popped up that said, hey, before you hit publish on this, we have tools baked into Acrobat that will run a check and see if stuff works, and at least meets some base level requirements, and you can know that you're moving forward at the root level with some good raw material that itself is already accessible, and then how we decide to distribute it becomes a whole lot easier if the root material itself was designed to be accessed.
Thank you, Roger. Nick, from your perspective, as both an instructor and a student, where do you see the biggest gaps between accessibility expectations and the day-to-day realities of teaching and learning?
So, like I said in I think my first response, we are kind of expected to know how to do this stuff, but we're never really taught. So it's an expectation, but we're never taught. We have to learn on our own or through the resources that are available to us. As a student, most of the classes we take are, well, I'll speak for graduate classes right now. The graduate classes are often non-compliant. A graduate Canvas course looks like a syllabus thrown in a Canvas course with like 4 upload links. So I know that's not the biggest area of concern, but as a student, there's a large gap between what I'm expected to be delivered as a student and what I am then expected to deliver as an instructor. What I'm getting is not the same as what I'm required to put out. So that's a pretty big gap there, I noticed just as a graduate student. And some institutional pressures this is honestly one of the biggest problems in the university system overall, is the precarity of a lot of instructor positions at universities. I work 4 jobs. So I teach at USF, I teach at Valencia, I work in the Valencia Downtown Writing Center, and I grade online for UT Austin. None of them pay me well, but I know a lot of us aren't paid well. But that means I now have to update. My classes are pretty compliant in general, but it's not perfect. All my videos are not perfect. All my color coordination is not exactly what it should be. I could do a lot more. I'm not getting paid to do all of that. That's extra prep time that I have to figure out, make time for, in between the 4 jobs and writing a dissertation. So there is a mismatch between expectations and just the time we have available. I don't even understand, maybe there's an answer to this, I don't understand why the deadline is at the end of the semester when we're all going to be doing our final grading. Why was it not at the beginning of the semester? Like, yes, that would have been more work over the winter break, but it would have been, at least we'd have time, not when we're trying to manage all of these other things. So that is not a problem with this solution, because we can't wave our hands and fix all the institutional issues with poorly paid labor across the entire system. But all of that cascades down and affects how well we are able to deliver our products to our students. And so it's just a very difficult situation all in all.
Thank you, Nick, for your honesty. Thank you for that. And I believe you pointed out some great points. You made some great points about the demands. And so that's kind of the institutional pressure of you having to make sure your content is accessible. And you said something very important about what you are getting is not what you're expected to do. And so I think that is, I just wanted to point that out, but you're right, yeah, we have all these deadlines at the end of the semester, and I'm like, wait a minute, I'm teaching, I'm grading, I'm doing all these things. Dr. Rodriguez, I have a question for you. Your field work spans the U.S., Guatemala, Ecuador, and Costa Rica. And these communities have a very different relationship to deafness, disability, and access. What does that comparative perspective reveal about the assumptions embedded in the U.S. accessibility policies and standards?
Well, we're talking about some very different locations, right? In the United States, we have so much access to technology. And I think, first of all, we have kind of a stereotype of what maybe one of the field sites I work at is in Guatemala, what their accessibility is like and what resources they have available to them. I actually looked up some very rough statistics. In the United States, we have almost 100% accessibility to a laptop, for example, or a desktop, or something like that, right, for university students. Where in Guatemala, it's a much lower number, 30%. However, this is where it gets interesting, right? The numbers for cell phone use in the United States are also close to 100% here in the United States. In Guatemala, the numbers are between 110 and 120%. So you're probably wondering, what the heck does that mean? What does it mean to be, to have 120% access to a cell phone? Well, it's a long history of technologies or lack of access to technologies in Guatemala. But when there's civil wars or the violence ended in the country, technology exploded. And all of a sudden you have people, fast forward to today, people have 2 to 3 cell phones each. They have one for their family, one for their work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So when COVID happened, and all of it, the entire world went online, many countries like Guatemala, where I work, ended up using technologies like WhatsApp, which is very popular internationally, as opposed to some of the resources that we use, right? They were more reliant on things like the cell phones as opposed to the laptops. And I know for many of us who teach, we know that our students also use cell phones when they do work, right, as opposed to a laptop or a desktop. But studies that have shown that in the United States, students do different types of assignments on different technologies, right? They might take quizzes on their phone, they might write a paper on a desktop or a laptop or a tablet, whatever. But in countries like Guatemala, where cell phones are very easily accessible, you have everybody doing everything on their phone. So I think I strayed a little way from your question, but I think the environment is so important, and the environment also includes socioeconomic status of what is accessible to people in different locations. And the youth in general, globally are very in tune with technology more than, maybe my generation or other generations. But people globally have figured out how to use technology to make themselves accessible for educational purposes, as well as many other purposes as well.
Thank you. I want to come back to your work, Dr. Rodriguez, and also pose this question for anyone on the panel that wants to answer it. And for our audience, if you have questions, please let us know, because we'll be opening up to audience questions. As we've heard, digital systems increasingly shape access to education, civic participation, public service, public policy, all of that. How might today's accessibility policies and the implementation required determine who is included or who is excluded in the future? And so if you could answer that question, and maybe Dr. Rodriguez, if you're able to answer the question from the perspective of the work that you do internationally in other countries, is that governed by the accessibility policies here in the U.S.?
So, not used to using the microphone. And one of the big disparities in Guatemala, for example, is between urban and rural regions. In the urban areas, you obviously have an access to technology that's really, really high, where in rural areas, you don't. And I think we don't think about that enough here in the United States, because I think there is also a disparity between rural and urban areas that exists in the United States. And I think a lot of the policy tends to be very standardized for everyone in the United States, making assumptions that maybe everybody has this type of access, but sometimes we don't look at the variation that exists within the United States. And rural and urban is just one type of difference, right? Certainly in large cities like Orlando or other areas, we definitely have access to all these technologies and internet and things like that. But I often think of my students who, especially when I teach online classes, they're not always in Orlando, they're not always in the major cities, and I often get emails saying, well, my internet went out. Those are issues of access that we often don't think about when policy is made. Not all of our students are in these major urban areas where, we kind of take for granted a lot of these things that are created with the policy. Does that answer your question a little more? Okay. We have the same variation, I guess to summarize it, we often think of these big differences between the very rich countries and the very poor countries, but we have the same variation here, right here in the United States. Some of our students even go to the library and use the desktops, right, as opposed to using their own technology at home. Or they borrow those computers that are made available for free that they can take home. And they have issues with that too. I think the only, I may be mistaken, so somebody please correct me, but there are those machines where you can get those laptops for I think it's 3 days, if I'm not mistaken. But then they have to return them. So, some of our computer students aren't able to, go home if they only have class once a week or something like that. So we certainly have a lot of our own disparities that exist here. And I don't know, I think policy, and this is very generalized, right? But I think a lot of times we tend to ignore some of those same issues that we have that we often focus on in other countries.
So I want to jump in real quick and kind of almost take it, Dr. Rodriguez, from where you went, because granted, keep in mind my background in working with people with disabilities, I think education in our campuses is often a reflection of our society and what's happening outside of these walls, right? And so when you think about disability and disability culture, that has not been talked about as much in the past as it has recently, right? So during COVID, we were all kind of stuck at home, TikTok exploded, social media exploded, but what I found was you're starting to see generations talk about disability openly, where we haven't done that before. We're starting to talk about neurodivergence, we're starting to talk about ADHD and how this interacts with technology, right? And so I say that because where we go in the future is gonna depend on where our society goes first, and also where technology goes. Roger mentioned the web initially was accessible because it was very kind of baseline, right? And then we added more to it. So as technology changes, we now have to figure out how to adapt that for accessibility too. And my hope is that's included as we do that. History shows us it's not. And so we have to start thinking through that. But also as we start talking about disability and normalizing these conversations and thinking about how access differs for everybody, we're gonna start thinking about accessibility when we're building content too, right? And so as we learn more and we start to hear more perspectives, we really start integrating this in our everyday lives. It's funny, kind of a little anecdote, I'm the accessibility and disability person in our office. Everybody does something else, and so I've had our staff go through trainings to look at this stuff, and they'll come back to me and say, oh my gosh, Christina, I was out and I saw this thing, like a curb cut or a ramp, and they're like, I never thought about that, but because we've talked about it, now I think about all the people that that's gonna help in access, right? And so it's expanding perspectives and thinking about disability and how that's culture and how that's identity and access. And that impacts how we build our technology and how we think about who needs access to that, right? It's the same thing we've seen with every identity before disability. Disability's always been a thing, we just haven't talked about it. And so I think that really will start impacting how we move forward and then how technology moves forward and how we can integrate those together.
Yeah, I will definitely build off of that. I guess I feel like I am very familiar with some of these accessibility features. I mean, I come from using Tumblr at like 12 years old and writing alt text for every single JPEG that has been posted. But that's not the common experience of everyone. So most of the Canvas courses I've used as a student don't even have alt text, but to be fair, that was like 2016, so they haven't caught up yet. But I do think we need to do more work like I think Roger said it about, and you did too, about the Word documents. If we can go past just the requirements while we are updating our courses, it will quote unquote future-proof, or a little bit future-proof us as well as we could. And there are more options too. Like I was just going through a professional development course for Valencia, and they have a download alternative formats button at the top, and they have ones that make the page readable for Braille users. They have a program called Beeline Reader, which can like change color gradients along text to help it more readable, to help make it more readable, especially for students with things like dyslexia or anyone. And that's kind of what I wanted to get to, is that the accessibility features are for everyone. It can make things easier for students, even if they did not know that it would make things easier. Some of our students might not know they need or would benefit from these features. It's not only people who have been, say, diagnosed with a specific thing or have a visual disability. I did not mean visual as in sight, I meant like you can look and see. A lot of them are invisible. And so explaining to our students the options and features we have in our courses and making them normal within the courses will have a higher buy-in from the student population. And that kind of comes back to the beginning where you said about the end user has responsibility. The students do have a responsibility to learn what will help them the best. We need to kind of help teach our students to be introspective about what works best for them. And a lot of these features can improve their learning, regardless of their situation. So acknowledging that fact as we move forward, I think remains very important.
So there's an interesting paradigm shift in thinking about less options for the creators and more options for the users. And that does get at the processing power that's necessary for someone who can express an idea that is an original idea that, yes, it could be produced as a video, it could be produced as text content, it could be produced as audio, but the ability for something like AI to convert that to a lot of different formats and have the source still be authentic, and then have the choice of where you consume it really be on the user side. That's where I think we can shift as a society to, instead of trying to create very targeted, which has limitations, you have to be very clear about what you're expressing, how you're citing it, where you're sourcing all of your information from, and then let the systems and the individuals decide how they want to consume it and put it together. In the era of sort of personalization and options, it's going to become very, very easy for people to pick and choose what they want to do to put together their own accessibility solutions. What we need to do is make sure that we are having good original ideas still generated, that we're taking the data and putting it together in unique ways, and then we're opening up the channels for people to consume it, how it's valuable for them, and opening up the feedback so they can channel it back to us so that we can learn from what they've done. So less options for the kind of creators to make something, give them a central panel where they can put together those ideas, put it all together for distribution, and then let the end users decide how they want to consume the content.
Yeah, I'll build off of that idea. I mean, that's, a vision that we're starting to see realized in research now is these, malleable user interfaces, personalization becoming something that, with the sorts of tools we have now, is something that's actually feasible, where you can say, hey, I want this web page to be, higher contrast and more accessible in this way, or I want, these sets of, things that work better for me.
Or you want it to be a sea shanty,
Yeah.
or you want it to produce in a cartoon format of Dilbert. Like, that flexibility is not hypothetical, right?
Yeah, it's not hypothetical, but the point that I want to make off of this is that this isn't, I think there needs to be some investment in this sort of research in order for this to continue to be pushed forward. I think research that's thinking about these things is such a small slice of like what we're doing in AI and computer science right now, that if there were policy decisions that shifted and prioritized certain sorts of research grants and things like that towards, incentivizing people to work on these topics and really not only develop the core underlying technologies, but then transfer these into practice. I mean, that's that's going to accelerate things more than more than a lot of other just general policy decisions. I think, at least based on what I've seen. And there's an appetite from the research community. People are excited about this stuff. Generally, researchers really want to help people. That's why a lot of us kind of got into the game. So I hope to see a bit more of that kind of moving into the future as well.
Alrighty, thank you, panelists. Do we have any questions from the audience? Alrighty. Well, thank you to our panelists for a very candid conversation and dodging a couple of questions. Thank you to everyone who is in the room and engaged in our conversation. And what we heard today definitely reflects both the urgency, but more so the complexity of the policies, the implementation, and the accountability. And so I can't remember which panelists talked about this, about expanding perspectives. And so hopefully today's conversation expanded your perspective and as it relates to compliance and inclusion and how they're not the same thing. And so meeting a technical standard is necessary, and as we heard from Roger, it's not always sufficient. The harder and longer work building a campus culture where accessibility is considered before content is created is Dr. Moran's responsibility. No, just joking. He talked about with software making sure accessibility is at the forefront in the development process, but we want to make sure that we're developing a culture of accessibility here at UCF that's created first and is not a result of a complaint. And so that requires us to be uncomfortable with dialogue and to learn things. As Nick pointed out, what he receives is not what he's expected to give to his students. And so we want to make sure that what we are giving to our students is what we're also getting back to, because Christina pointed out how employees are very important in this whole digital accessibility requirements as well, because employees have requirements. And so if we can create, manage, teach, procure digital content, we can also figure out how to do it and make sure it's accessible. And so it's a community of practice focused on awareness, collaboration, support, grounded in understanding. And I do want to point out that we do have a digital accessibility liaisons program that is headed up by Kevin Price and Azon Bonificio. And it was actually developed in collaboration with Christina, who led our initiative for digital accessibility. And so the liaison program connects faculty, staff, and students with a digital accessibility lab to build practical knowledge, answer questions early, and help accessibility be a part of everyday decision making and not just a response to a problem. So Nick, when you talked about having a guided resource, we have a liaisons program. So while you don't teach at UCF, you maybe. Okay, maybe. Well, tell your counterparts. But here at UCF, we do take digital accessibility very seriously, and so we do have a digital accessibility liaison program. And so if you want to know more about that program, Kevin, if you want to raise your hand, and Azon, they can certainly assist you. They work very diligently to alleviate the day-to-day things that Christina doesn't have to deal with, as far as like, how do I make this Word doc accessible, this PDF, or what have you. And so they will absolutely be your guide. A video of today's forum will be posted publicly on our website within 10 business days. And so we thank you very much for being a part of UCF's Public Policy Events Forum today. We thank you for this conversation because it matters. And I encourage you to go ahead and mark your calendar for April 24, 2026. And take a peruse of your own website and see if it's accessible. And if it's not, contact Kevin, contact Azon, and find out what tools are already built in that you can utilize. So thank you again for coming today, and go nice, charge on.